The rain fell like iron nails upon the shields, blood mixed with mud beneath a sky that wept ash and fury. Bjorn stood among the fallen, chest heaving, sword still raised toward the heavens. Around him, the battlefield stretched like a graveyard of ambition. Bodies of men who had believed themselves. Invincible now, silent beneath the indifferent clouds. He had survived. Again, but survival meant nothing when the one thing he wanted remained beyond reach. 3 days prior, he had stood before Lord Aldrich's hall, a simple warrior asking for the hand of the Lord's daughter, Astrid. Her name was a whisper of starlight, a sound that made even the hardest men soften. Bjorn had seen her only twice, once at the summer festival, where her laughter had risen above the music like a bird taking flight, and once at the market, where she had looked at him with eyes that held oceans. Lord Aldrich had laughed, not with cruelty, but with the certainty of a man who knew the order of the world. "My daughter will marry a lord," he had said, his voice echoing through the stone hall. "Not a sword-bearer, not a wanderer who owns nothing but scars and stories. Bring me a title, warrior. Bring me land and Ubanamen, then we shall speak of marriage." The words had been a blade through Bjorn's ribs, sharper than any weapon he had faced in battle, so he had gone to war again. Now, standing in the aftermath of slaughter, he understood what he must do. The impossible was simply the thing no one else had, the courage to attempt. If Lord Aldrich demanded he become something greater than himself, then he would reshape the very foundations of his fate. The rain continued to fall. Bjorn turned his back on the dead and began walking toward the northern coast, where rumor spoke of a jarl whose loyalty could be won, and lands that lay unclaimed by any crown. Before we continue this journey, subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your strength keeps these legends alive. Astrid knew nothing of the battlefield. She knew only the cold stone of her father's keep, the endless embroidery that occupied her hands but never her mind, and the weight of expectations that pressed upon her like winter snow upon a roof. She had been raised to be a prize, beautiful, educated, obedient. Her father loved her in his way, the way a merchant loves a rare jewel, something to be protected and eventually traded for maximum advantage. 3 lords had already sent proposals, men with silver in their beards and cruelty in their smiles, men who saw her as a bridge to her father's wealth and influence. None of them made her heart quicken, but the warrior did. She had noticed him at the festival, moving through the crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. While other men boasted and postured, he had simply stood, watching the dancing, a cup of mead forgotten in his hand. Their eyes had met across the firelight, and something had shifted in the air. Between them, recognition without words, connection without explanation. When he appeared at the market days later, she had felt her breath catch. He bought salt and oats, speaking little to the merchant, his movements efficient and unhurried. She had watched from behind her handmaidens, committing every detail to memory, the way his shoulders carried themselves, the scar along his jawline, the gentleness with which he handled the merchant's coin. Then he had come to ask for her hand. She had heard everything from behind the tapestry in the great hall. Her father's laughter, Bjorn's steady voice, never pleading, never desperate, simply stating his intent with the same calm certainty she had observed at the market. And her father's final pronouncement, the terms that seemed designed to be impossible. After he left, she had found her father in his solar. "You sent him away to die," she had said, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "I sent him away to prove himself," her father corrected, not even looking up from his ledgers. "If he is the man you believe him to be, he will return. If not, then you will thank me for sparing you a lifetime of poverty and disappointment." Weeks had passed, then months. Winter arrived with its teeth bared, and still no word came from the north. Astrid wore her patience like armor, refusing to let her father see her worry. She learned to school her expression into perfect neutrality, even as her heart screamed questions into the void. At night, Alone in her chamber, she would stand at the narrow window and search the darkness for any sign of movement on the road. She made herself a promise. If he returned, she would not let her father's ambitions separate them again. Somehow, she would find the courage to choose her own fate. The wind howled through gaps in the stone, carrying snow and secrets from distant lands. The northern territories were lawless in the way that winter seas are lawless, not without rules, but governed by forces more ancient and absolute than any king's decree. Here, respect was earned in blood and kept through strength. Words meant little. Action meant everything. Jarl Eriksson ruled these lands with an iron fist wrapped in shrewd intelligence. He was not born to power. He had carved it from the wilderness with sword and strategy, building alliances through both fear and genuine loyalty. Men followed him because he was fair in his brutality, consistent in his judgments, and absolutely lethal to those who betrayed him. Bjorn arrived at Eriksson's hall on the first day of the new year, when the snow lay 3 feet deep and the world seemed frozen in eternal silence. He came alone, wearing travel-stained furs and carrying his sword openly, a gesture of honesty in a land where hidden weapons were expected. The Jarl received him in a hall that smelled of smoke, ale, and wet dogs. 24 warriors sat at long tables, their eyes tracking Bjorn's every movement with the predatory attention of wolves assessing potential prey or competition. "You come asking for something," Eriksson said. "It was not a question." "I come offering something," Bjorn replied. "My sword, my loyalty, and my willingness to do what others will not." The Jarl leaned back in his carved chair, fingers steepled beneath his grey-streaked beard. "Every third man who arrives at my door makes similar promises. Most are dead within a season. What makes you different, stranger?" "Nothing makes me different," Bjorn said, "except that I do not lie to myself about why I'm here. I need land and title. You need warriors you can trust. I am willing to earn what I seek through whatever means necessary." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled warriors. One of them, a massive man with a braided red beard, laughed outright. "Listen to this pup. He speaks of necessity as if the world owes him something." Eriksson raised a hand, silencing the room instantly. His gaze never left Bjorn's face. "Why do you need these things? Revenge, greed, pride, love?" Bjorn said simply. The hall fell utterly silent. For a long moment the Jarl said nothing, then slowly he smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face completely. "Love, the most dangerous motivator of all. Men will die for gold, fight for glory, and kill for revenge. But a man who acts for love, that man will move mountains or burn the world trying." He stood, descending from his seat to stand face to face with Bjorn. "I will make you a wager, warrior. Beyond my lands, across the frozen waste, lies a settlement that refuses to acknowledge my authority. They are led by a man named Grimwald, who fancies himself independent of any lord's rule. Bring me his submission, his genuine oath, not his corpse, and I will grant you lands of your own and the title of Thane. You will have the rank of a minor lord, enough to satisfy whatever father stands between you and your heart's desire. How long do I have? Spring thaw, 3 months. After that, I march on them myself, and the offer dies with the snow." Bjorn extended his hand. "I accept your terms." The Jarl's grip was iron. "Then may the gods favor your impossible task, young fool. You'll need their blessing and more." The journey north was a descent into the realm of ancient cold, where the air itself seemed hostile to life. Bjorn traveled alone, his supplies carefully rationed, his mind focused on the singular goal ahead. This was not a path for armies or grand expeditions. This was the work of one man willing to bet everything on his own determination. The landscape transformed as he pushed deeper into the wilderness. Forests of pine stood like silent witnesses, their branches heavy with ice that caught the weak winter sun and threw it back in fractured rainbows. Frozen rivers became roads of treacherous glass. At night, The aurora danced overhead in ribbons of green and violet, beautiful and utterly indifferent to human suffering. He thought of Astrid constantly. Her image became a talisman against despair, a light that burned in his mind when exhaustion threatened to claim him. He remembered the exact shade of her eyes, not simply blue, but the blue of deep water seen through ice, complex and alive. He remembered how she had stood so straight and still at the market, dignity radiating from her like heat from a forge. She was worth this, worth the frozen fingers and the nights when he could not feel his feet, when he had to force himself to keep walking or risk dying in his sleep, worth the hunger, the loneliness, and the very real possibility that he might fail. On the 15th day, he encountered wolves. They came at dusk, 7 grey shadows moving through the trees with fluid coordination. Bjorn had been preparing his meagre camp when he felt their presence, that primal awareness that predator and prey share across all time. He drew his sword slowly, positioning himself with his back to a massive boulder. The wolves circled, their breath steaming in the frigid air. The pack leader, a scarred female with one torn ear, studied him with intelligent eyes. She was calculating, measuring threat against hunger, weighing whether this prey was worth the risk. Bjorn did not move, did not show fear. He held the leader's gaze and projected every ounce of his determination, his refusal to become food for carrion. He thought of Astrid, and that thought became a kind of armor, an invisible shield of pure intention. The moment stretched, then with a soft growl that might have been respect or simple pragmatism, the pack leader turned away. The others followed, melting back into the forest like smoke dissipating in wind. Bjorn allowed himself one shaking breath before lowering his sword. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the intensity of holding so still, so completely focused. He had won through nothing but will, and the victory tasted like iron and hope. 10 days later, he crested the final ridge and saw Grimwald's settlement spread below him like a collection of defiant embers against the white expanse. Smoke rose from 24 chimneys. Figures moved between buildings, going about the business of survival in a land that accepted no weakness. Bjorn studied the scene for a long time, considering his approach. Force would not work. He was one man against a community. Deception would fail. These were northern folk, suspicious and sharp. That left only truth, offered with enough conviction to be impossible to ignore. He descended toward the settlement as evening fell, walking openly down the main path with his sword sheathed and his hands visible. Within moments, he was surrounded by armed men and women, their weapons trained on his heart. "I come seeking your leader," he called out, his voice strong despite the cold. "I have a proposal that will change all your futures." A tall woman with iron-grey hair pushed through the crowd. Her eyes were fierce and calculating, her bearing that of someone accustomed to command. "I am Grimwald," she said, "and you have exactly 1 minute to explain why I shouldn't have you thrown back into the waste you came from." Bjorn met her gaze steadily. "Because I'm the only person offering you a choice before. Choice is taken from you entirely." The silence that followed was profound. Then Grimwald smiled, sharp as a knife's edge. "Come inside, stranger. Let's hear what impossible thing you think we should believe." Grimwald's hall was modest compared to the great keeps of the south, but it possessed a warmth that those stone fortresses could never match. The fire burned bright and genuine. The people gathered around the long tables carried themselves with the easy confidence of those who had chosen their exile and made it into something resembling freedom. Bjorn stood before them all, aware of the weight of dozens of eyes assessing every word, every gesture. These were not people easily impressed or quickly convinced. They had built their lives on the rejection of outside authority, and asking them to bend knee to any jarl was asking them to betray the very principle that defined them. So, he did not ask them to bend. "Jarl Eriksson will come with spring," Bjorn began, his voice carrying through the hall. "This is not threat, it is simple fact. His patience has limits, and those limits have been reached. When he comes, you will have 2 choices, submit or die. He has 300 warriors. You have 50, perhaps 70 if you count every person capable of holding a weapon. Let him come, growled a young man from the back. We'll water the ice with his blood. You'll die heroically, Bjorn agreed, and be forgotten by the next winter. Your children will be scattered, your homes burned, your names lost to everything but snow and silence. Grimwald raised her hand, quieting the angry murmurs. You paint a dark picture, Southerner. I assume you have an alternative to propose. I do. Submit now, on your own terms. Eriksson wants acknowledgement of his authority, formal oath and yearly tribute, but he is also practical. He does not want to waste warriors conquering those who could instead become allies. I believe I can negotiate terms that preserve your autonomy while satisfying his requirements. And why would we trust you to negotiate anything? Another voice called out. Because I have nothing to gain from betraying you, Bjorn said simply. If I return to Eriksson with your forced submission, he will give me what I was promised, land and title. But if I return with your willing oath, secured through terms you find acceptable, he will respect me as someone capable of achieving the impossible through means other than violence. That respect has value beyond land. Grimwald studied him for a long moment. You're doing this for someone, she said finally. A woman, if I read you correctly. Everything about you speaks of a man driven by singular purpose. Bjorn did not deny it. Her father demands I become a lord before he will permit our marriage. I am attempting to satisfy that requirement without becoming the kind of man who takes what he wants through blood alone. Noble, Grimwald said dryly, or foolish. Time will tell. Which, she turned to face her people. We will vote. Not on whether to trust this stranger entirely, but on whether his proposal deserves consideration. Those in favor of hearing detailed terms, show hands. Slowly, hands rose throughout the hall. Not all, perhaps 60%, but enough to constitute clear majority. Grimwald nodded. Then we talk. But know this, Southerner. If your Jarl betrays the terms you negotiate, we will consider you responsible. Your life will be forfeit to our justice. Understood, Bjorn said. I would expect nothing less. They talked through the night, hammering out terms that balanced pride with pragmatism. Eriksson would receive formal acknowledgement as overlord. The settlement would provide modest annual tribute, furs, timber and iron ore from the nearby hills. In exchange, they would maintain complete internal autonomy, their own laws, their own leadership. No garrison of Eriksson's men, no interference in daily governance. They would be allied rather than conquered, partners in mutual benefit rather than subjects under domination. As dawn light began filtering through the high windows, Grimwald finally extended her hand. I will give you written oath to carry to your Jarl. If he accepts these terms, we will honor our word. You have 1 month to return with his response. After that, we prepare for war. Bjorn clasped her hand firmly. He will accept. He is ambitious, not stupid. What you offer is worth more than corpses in the snow. We shall see, Grimwald said. The North teaches us to trust actions over promises. Safe travels, stranger. May your impossible love prove worth all this trouble. Winter held the land in its grip, and in Lord Aldrich's keep, Astrid felt the cold settling into her bones despite the roaring hearth-fires. Her father had grown increasingly insistent about entertaining the suit of Lord Radolf, a man whose lands bordered theirs to the east, and whose reputation preceded him like the stench of something rotting. Radolf was wealthy. Radolf was powerful. Radolf had been married twice before, both wives dying young under circumstances that were never quite explained, but always whispered about in shadowed corners. He arrives next week, her father announced over evening meal, his tone suggesting the matter was settled. I have given him reason to believe his proposal will be accepted. Astrid set down her cup with deliberate care. I have not accepted any proposal. You are my daughter, Aldrich said, his patience clearly thinning. Your acceptance is not required. Your obedience is. My warrior has not yet returned. Her father laughed, but there was an edge to it now. Your warrior is dead, child. Frozen in some northern waste, or killed by bandits, or simply swallowed by his own foolish ambition. Men like that do not become lords. They die, trying. Then wait until spring, Astrid pressed. If he has not returned by Thor, I will consider Lord Radulf's suit. No, Eldric's voice was iron. I have given my word to Radulf. The betrothal will be announced when he arrives. The wedding will occur before spring planting. This discussion is finished. Astrid felt something crack inside her chest. Not her spirit, but rather the final restraint that had kept her obedient all these years. She stood slowly, her chair scraping against stone. Then know this, father. If you force this marriage, you will have a daughter only in name. Whatever love I bore you will be buried with my freedom. You will have purchased Radulf's alliance with the death of everything genuine between us. She left the hall before he could respond, her steps measured and controlled until she reached her chamber. Only then did she allow the tears to come. Not tears of weakness, but of fury and grief and determination. As fate turns against our hero, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's see how far these voices can travel. That night, Astrid made her decision. She could not stop the betrothal. She could not defy her father openly without losing everything, including any chance of ever seeing Bjorn again if he did return. But she could make preparations. She could ensure that when the moment came, she would be ready to choose her own path, whatever the cost. She began gathering supplies in secret, coins stolen from the household accounts, warm clothing hidden in the back of her wardrobe, dried food taken gradually from the kitchens. She cultivated friendship with the stablemaster's daughter, learning which horses were gentlest for a rider without experience. She studied the maps in her father's solar, memorizing roads and distances to the north. If Bjorn returned, she would go to him. If he did not return, she would go find him or die, trying, which seemed infinitely preferable to a life shackled to Radulf's cruelty. Her handmaiden Elena discovered the hidden supplies 3 days before Radulf's arrival. Astrid's heart had stopped as the older woman held up the bundled provisions, her expression unreadable. "My lady," Elena said. Elena, quietly, "If you mean to run, you'll need warmer boots than these." And the sorrel mare, not the grey, she's steadier on rough terrain. Astrid stared at her, hardly daring to breathe. Elena smiled sadly. "I was young once. I also loved someone my father deemed unsuitable. I chose obedience and have regretted it every day for 30 years. I will not watch you make the same mistake." She pressed a small pouch into Astrid's hands. "Silver, from my own savings. It's not much, but it may buy you shelter when you need it most. Elena, if my father learns you helped me, then he learns." The woman said firmly, "Some things are worth the consequences. Now Lord Radulf arrives in 3 days. If your warrior has not returned by then, you must be ready to leave that very night. The moon will be dark, good for hiding, terrible for travel. You'll need to be very careful." The 3 days passed. Like centuries, Astrid maintained perfect composure during the day, playing the dutiful daughter, even as her packed saddlebags waited hidden in the stable. Lord Radulf arrived with appropriate ceremony, a man in his 5th decade, handsome in a cold way, his smile never quite reaching his calculating eyes. He brought gifts, jewels that felt like chains, silk that might as well have been a burial shroud. He spoke to her father about alliances and trade routes and strategic advantages. He looked at Astrid the way a man looks at property, assessing value, planning use, already considering himself master. That night, Astrid stood at her window for the last time, staring into the darkness. If Bjorn was coming, he was out of time. If he was lost to the north, she would go find his memory and build whatever life she could from the ashes of this one. The moon rose, thin as a knife blade. Astrid gathered her cloak and prepared to flee into an uncertain future that nevertheless held more hope than the certainty her father offered. Then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the walls, she heard it, the sound of a horse's hooves on frozen ground, coming fast from the north road. Bjorn had pushed his horse to the edge of endurance, racing against time and fate. The journey back from Grimwald settlement had been a blur of frozen roads and stolen rest. every moment carrying the fear that he would arrive too late, that whatever window of opportunity existed would have already closed. He reached Lord Aldrich's lands at sunset on the very day Astrid's betrothal to Radulf was to be formally announced. He learned this from a farmer on the road, who spoke of the upcoming feast with a mixture of gossip and sympathy. "They say she didn't want this match," the farmer confided. "But what the Lord wants, the Lord gets. That's how the world works, isn't it?" Bjorn did not stop to explain how the world might work differently. He simply rode harder. He arrived at the keep as full darkness fell, his appearance causing immediate alarm among the guards. He looked like something dragged from the wild, furs encrusted with ice, beard grown long and untamed, eyes burning with intensity that made even armed men step back instinctively. "I demand audience with Lord Aldrich," he announced, his voice carrying through the courtyard. "I have returned to claim what was promised." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. One of them, braver or more foolish than the rest, raised his spear. "Lord Aldrich is entertaining an important guest. He is not to be disturbed." "Then disturb him," Bjorn said flatly, "or I will do it myself, and you will have to decide whether stopping me is worth dying for." It was not a threat. Simply statement of fact, delivered with absolute certainty. Something in his bearing, the weight of his presence after months of surviving the impossible, made the guards believe him completely. I'll inform the steward," one of them said, backing away. Within minutes, Bjorn found himself standing in the great hall, acutely aware that he looked entirely out of place among the finery and candlelight. Lord Aldrich sat at the head table beside a stranger who could only be Radulf, a man who regarded Bjorn with the expression of someone noticing an insect that had inexplicably wandered into a royal feast. But Bjorn's eyes found Astrid instantly. She stood near the far wall, pale as snow, her hands gripping the back of a chair so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Their gazes locked across the crowded hall, and everything else became background. Noise. Meaningless chatter in a language that no longer mattered. "This is highly irregular," Lord Aldrich began, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "You interrupt private proceedings." "I have returned," Bjorn interrupted, never looking away from Astrid, "to present you with what you demanded. I, Ibn Thane of the Northern Reach, sworn to Jarl Eriksson, with lands and bannermen under my protection. I have title. I have authority. I have met your conditions." He pulled forth the sealed documents Eriksson had provided. Formal declaration of title, maps showing his lands, letters confirming his status. He dropped them on the table before Aldrich with a heavy thud that silenced the entire hall. "I have done the impossible," Bjorn continued, his voice filling every corner of the space. "I have claimed rank from nothing, through neither birth nor theft, but through will and skill and determination. Your conditions are satisfied. I claim your daughter's hand in marriage, as was agreed." Lord Radulf rose slowly, his face darkening. "This is an insult beyond bearing. Aldrich, you gave me assurances." "I gave assurances that my daughter would marry a lord," Aldrich said slowly, his eyes scanning the documents before him. His expression was complex, anger warring with a certain grudging respect, calculation mixing with something that might have been paternal pride. "This man has, technically, met those conditions." "Technically?" Radulf's voice rose. "You would break faith with me over technicalities. I have come with good faith, with proper—" "You came assuming I had no other options," Aldrich interrupted quietly. "That assumption was yours, not mine." He looked up at Bjorn, really seeing him perhaps for the first time, not as an obstacle or inconvenience, but as someone who had fundamentally rewritten the expected story. "How? Does it matter?" Bjorn asked. "You set your conditions believing them impossible. I made them reality. The how is irrelevant to the whether." Astrid moved then, crossing the hall with measured steps that suggested royalty rather than submission. She stopped beside Bjorn, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, her presence a statement more eloquent than any words. "Father," she said, her voice steady and clear, "this man has proven himself beyond any reasonable doubt. He has met your challenge. Will you honor your word, or will you teach me that a lord's promise means nothing when it becomes inconvenient? The silence stretched impossibly long. Every eye in the hall was fixed on Lord Aldrich, waiting to see which version of himself he would choose to be: the pragmatic lord who honored contracts, or the controlling father who could not accept being outmaneuvered. Finally, slowly, Aldrich rose from his seat. He studied his daughter's face, then Bjorn's, then the documents before him. When he spoke, his voice carried resignation mixed with something that might have been relief. "The conditions are met. The marriage may proceed." Radolf erupted in fury, his chair crashing backward. "This is betrayal. I will remember this insult, Aldrich. Our families will continue as neighbors who conduct business at arm's length." Aldrich finished calmly. "I suggest you depart before you say something that cannot be unsaid." Radolf stormed from the hall, his retinue scrambling after him, leaving behind a silence that felt like the aftermath of a storm. Slowly, the gathered nobles began to murmur, then talk, then laugh, nervous energy releasing into gossip and speculation about this unprecedented turn of events. Bjorn felt Astrid's hand slip into his, her fingers cold and trembling. He squeezed gently, pouring every ounce of reassurance and triumph and relief into that simple contact. "You came back," she whispered, so quietly only he could hear. "I promised I would become what I needed to be," he replied. "That promise is the only thing that matters." The wedding took place 3 weeks later, as winter began its slow surrender to spring. The ceremony was neither grand nor ostentatious. At Astrid's request, it was held in the small stone chapel on her father's lands, attended by close family and a handful of witnesses. Bjorn wore his finest clothing, which still looked modest compared to the silk and velvet of traditional nobility. Astrid wore a dress of deep blue wool, simple and unadorned, her only jewelry a silver pendant that had belonged to her mother. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promises made real through the weight of all they had endured to reach this moment. Lord Aldrich gave his daughter away with an expression that mixed emotions too complex for any single name. As he placed Astrid's hand in Bjorn's, he leaned close and spoke so only they could hear. "I knew you would try," he said quietly. "I did not believe you would succeed. You have proven me wrong, which is a rare and uncomfortable experience." He paused, then added, "Treat her well, or everything you have built will mean nothing." "I understand," Bjorn replied simply. After the ceremony, as the small gathering shared wine and bread, Astrid's handmaiden Elena approached Bjorn with tears streaming down her weathered face. She said nothing, simply embraced him briefly before stepping back and nodding once. Acknowledgement of his achievement and gratitude for restoring something she had lost long ago. Proof that sometimes fighting for the impossible could actually succeed. Within the week, Bjorn and Astrid departed for the northern reach, traveling the same roads he had traversed alone months before. But this journey was entirely different, no longer desperate flight toward uncertain goal, but instead measured procession toward earned future. They rode side by side, their horses matching pace naturally, their conversations flowing from practical planning to philosophical speculation to comfortable silence. Astrid proved herself more capable than Bjorn had anticipated. She did not complain about the rough conditions or long days in the saddle. She treated each challenge, river crossings, unexpected storms, nights in rough camps, as adventure rather than hardship. He watched her adapt and grow stronger with every passing day, her sheltered upbringing falling away like old skin to reveal someone fundamentally resilient beneath. "I was afraid," she admitted one evening as they sat beside their campfire, watching sparks rise toward the star-scattered sky. "When you left to seek your fortune, I was terrified you would die, or change, or forget why. You had gone in the first place. So many stories end with the hero transformed into something unrecognizable. And now?" Bjorn asked. Now I see that you changed only in the ways necessary to accomplish what needed doing. The core of you, the man who stood in my father's hall and refused to accept that love was insufficient reason, that man is still here." She leaned against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, while the fire painted dancing shadows on the trees around them. They were alone in the wilderness, vulnerable to 1,000 dangers, possessing little beyond their horses and provisions and each other's company. Yet Bjorn had never felt wealthier in his entire life. They reached the northern reach as the first true warmth of spring touched the land. Grimwald met them at the boundary of the settlement, her expression characteristically unreadable. "So the southerner returns," she observed, "and he's brought someone. This must be the woman worth all the trouble." "Astrid," Bjorn introduced. "Meet Grimwald, the leader whose wisdom made all of this possible." Astrid dismounted and offered her hand in the northern style, wrist to wrist, an acknowledgement of equality rather than hierarchy. Grimwald's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she accepted the gesture with approval. "You have good manners for a lord's daughter," Grimwald said. "Let's hope you have good sense as well. You'll need both to survive up here." Over the following weeks, Bjorn and Astrid built, in their household, a modest hall constructed with help from the settlement folk, positioned on a slight rise overlooking the valley. It was not grand like her father's keep, but it was theirs, built with their own hands, and the goodwill of their neighbors. Astrid threw herself into the work with determination that surprised everyone except Bjorn. She learned to manage household stores, treat minor injuries, mediate disputes between settlers, and 100 other practical skills her aristocratic education had never covered. She made mistakes, certainly, but she learned from each one, earning respect through humility and genuine effort. Jarl Eriksson visited as spring became summer, inspecting his newest Thane's holdings with a critical eye. Bjorn showed him everything openly: the growing settlement, the productive relationships with Grimwald's people, the careful management of resources that suggested sustainability rather than exploitation. "You have exceeded my expectations," Eriksson admitted as they stood watching the sun set over the northern forests. "I gave you an impossible task, assuming you would fail, interestingly. Instead, you succeeded in ways that benefit everyone involved. That is a rare quality, the ability to create solutions where others see only conflict." He paused, then added, "I may have additional tasks for you in future if you're interested. The North is full of impossible situations that require your particular approach. I will consider any." "A proposal," Bjorn replied carefully, "but my first loyalty is to my wife and the people who depend on me here." "As it should be," Eriksson agreed. "A leader who abandons those closest to him for distant ambitions is no leader at all." The first year in the Northern Reach was a crucible that tested everything Bjorn and Astrid had built. Summer's warmth was brief and deceptive, giving way to autumn's hard preparations and winter's brutal reality far more severe than anything Astrid had experienced in her father's well-provisioned keep. The snows came early that year, arriving in October with a fury that suggested the gods themselves were testing the newcomers' resolve. Food stores that had seemed adequate became questionable. Illnesses swept through the settlement, nothing deadly, but enough to strain their limited medical supplies and Astrid's growing knowledge of healing herbs. One particularly harsh night, a young family's roof collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow. The family, a couple with 3 children, would have frozen before morning, if not discovered. Bjorn and Astrid opened their own hall without hesitation, sharing their space and stores, even though it meant rationing their own supplies more severely. "We cannot save everyone," Bjorn warned his wife one evening as they lay together beneath every blanket they owned, their breath visible in the cold air despite the banked fire. "If this winter grows worse, we may face choices where generosity becomes its own form of suicide. Then we face those choices when they come," Astrid replied, her voice steady despite the cold. "But we do not close our doors while we still have anything to share. That is not the people we came here to be." Her certainty reminded him why he had crossed frozen wastelands for her, not because she was beautiful or well-born, but because her spirit burned with a light that no hardship could extinguish. The crisis came in January, when a hunting party failed to return. 5 men, including 2 of Grimwald's best trackers, had gone into the forest seeking game to supplement. Dwindling stores. 3 days passed with no word. The settlement gathered in Bjorn's hall to debate whether to send searchers or conserve energy for survival. "We cannot risk more lives looking for those likely already dead," argued one of the elders, his voice heavy with pragmatic sorrow. "We do not abandon our people while hope remains," Grimwald countered, "but I will not order anyone into that waste. I ask for volunteers only." Bjorn stood. "I will go." "You're the Thane," someone protested. "If you die, this entire settlement loses its political protection. That's foolish risk." "If I claim authority over these people but refuse to share their dangers, then my authority means nothing," Bjorn replied. "I will leave at first light. Who comes with me?" Astrid rose beside him. "I do." The hall erupted in protests. She raised her hand, silencing them with a gesture she had learned from her father. Quiet authority that demanded respect rather than asking for it. "I am smaller than most here," she said calmly. "I require less food, can move through deep snow more easily, and will not be missed from essential work as many of you would be. Additionally, I can treat injuries if we find survivors. My husband goes, I go with him. This is not debate." They departed the next morning, just the 2 of them, carrying minimal supplies to maximize speed. The forest was a cathedral of ice and silence, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. They followed the hunting party's trail, increasingly difficult to read as wind and fresh snow obscured the tracks. On the 2nd day, they found blood in the snow. Not much, but enough to suggest injury rather than successful hunt. They moved faster, following the sporadic trail deeper into territory that felt ancient and untouched by human presence. They found the hunters in a shallow cave as dusk approached. 3 of them were dead, not from violence but from exposure and what looked like a fall. The remaining 2 were alive but barely, huddled together for warmth, their supplies exhausted. Astrid immediately began treating their frostbite while Bjorn built a fire and prepared hot broth from their meager rations. One of the survivors, a young man named Torsten, kept apologizing through chattering teeth. "Stupid. Should have turned back. Sorry." "You're alive," Bjorn said firmly. "Everything else can be addressed." Later, they spent the night in that cave, all 4 of them huddled close to the fire, taking turns keeping watch and feeding the flames. Bjorn and Astrid shared their warmth and provisions without hesitation, even knowing it meant their own return journey would be more dangerous. At dawn, they faced the grim task of carrying the dead. They fashioned crude travois from branches and rope, loading the bodies with all the dignity they could manage. The journey back was exhausting. 2 days of fighting through snow while pulling extra weight, stopping frequently to rest and prevent complete collapse. They staggered into the settlement at midday on the 3rd day, exhausted beyond words. Grimwald met them at the edge of the village, her face unreadable as she assessed the scene. 2 survivors alive, 3 dead but recovered for proper burial, and the Thane and his wife looking like they had aged years in mere days. "You kept your word," Grimwald said quietly. "You did not abandon them." "We're not that kind of people," Astrid replied, swaying slightly with exhaustion. "None of us are." The settlement cared for them while they recovered, bringing food, tending their frostbite, ensuring they could rest without worry. When Bjorn finally emerged from his hall 3 days later, he found the community had come together to repair the damage winter had inflicted, sharing resources more freely, working with renewed cooperation. The young family, whose roof had collapsed, approached him hesitantly. The father, a carpenter named Magnus, spoke with quiet intensity. "We heard what you did, risking everything for people who might already be lost. That's leadership we can believe in, my lord." "I'm not your lord," Bjorn corrected gently. "I'm your neighbor who happens to have a title." "There's a difference," Magnus smiled. "Aye, there is, and that difference is why we'll follow you anywhere you need us to go." Spring arrived like a promise kept, the snow retreating gradually, revealing earth that smelled of renewal and possibility. The settlement had survived winter, though not unchanged. They had lost 5 people to cold and illness, gained 2 births that felt like defiance against death itself, and learned what it truly meant to depend on one another. But survival created new challenges. With the thaw came traders from the south, bringing news and complications in equal measure. Lord Radulf, still bitter over his rejected proposal, had been spreading rumours, claiming Bjorn's title was fraudulent, that he had deceived Lord Aldrich, that the Northern Reach was nothing but a collection of bandits pretending at legitimacy. The rumours were strategic, poison, designed to undermine both Bjorn's authority and Jarl Eriksson's reputation for choosing capable thanes. If left unaddressed, they could result in other lords refusing to recognise Bjorn's status. Or worse, Eriksson feeling compelled to revoke the title to preserve his own credibility. Astrid found Bjorn standing outside their hall one morning, staring south toward her father's lands with an expression she had learned to recognize, the same look he wore when calculating impossible odds. "You're thinking about going back," she said. Not a question. Radulf's poison spreads because no one has directly challenged it. If I ignore these rumors, they become accepted truth. If I confront them, I risk everything we've built here, but potentially secure it permanently. "Then we go together," Astrid said firmly. "My father's hall is where this must be settled. His word still carries weight among the southern lords. If he publicly reaffirms your title and our marriage, Radulf's rumors lose their foundation." They made the journey south as summer approached, this time accompanied by a dozen of their people, not as soldiers, but as witnesses to what they had built. These were farmers, craftspeople, and hunters whose presence testified to the reality of the Northern Reach more eloquently than any documents. Lord Aldrich received them in his great hall with a complex expression that mixed discomfort with grudging respect. He had aged in the year since Astrid's departure, the lines in his face deeper, his movements less certain. "You've returned," he observed. "I had heard rumors you were struggling in that frozen waste." "We've been building," Bjorn corrected, "and now we need your help addressing lies being spread by someone who cannot accept that honor sometimes. Requires uncomfortable choices." Lord Radulf was not present. He was too clever to attend a gathering where he might be publicly challenged. But several other lords were there, including those who had heard and partially believed the rumors. Bjorn addressed them directly, presenting documentation from Jarl Eriksson, testimony from Grimwald's written statement, and most powerfully, the evidence of his people themselves. Magnus the carpenter spoke of how Bjorn had shared his own hall when Magnus's roof collapsed. Torsten described being rescued from certain death in the frozen forest. Others testified to fair leadership, hard work, and the kind of earned respect that no fraudulent title could command. Astrid stood beside her husband throughout, her presence itself a statement. She had left comfort and security for hardship and uncertainty, and she looked healthier, stronger, more genuinely alive than she ever had as her father's sheltered daughter. Finally, Lord Aldrich rose to speak. The hall fell silent, everyone aware that his words would carry determinative weight. "I set conditions I believed impossible," he began, his voice carrying through the space. "I did this because I thought myself wise, protecting my daughter from unsuitable match through requirements that could not be met. This man," he gestured toward Bjorn, "proved me wrong. He met every condition I specified, not through trickery or deception, but through extraordinary determination and skill." He paused, letting his words settle. "Moreover, he has built something genuine in the north. I have received reports, not rumors, but verified accounts, of a settlement that prospers through cooperation rather than exploitation. My daughter writes to me regularly, and her letters speak of happiness and purpose she never found in my keep." Aldrich's gaze swept the gathered lords. Those who spread lies about this man's legitimacy do so out of wounded pride, not concern for truth. "I publicly affirm his title, his marriage to my daughter, and his standing as a lord of genuine merit. Anyone who disputes this disputes my honor as well. Let that be understood clearly." The message was unambiguous. Attacking Bjorn now meant making an enemy of Lord Aldrich, which few were willing to risk. The gathered lords murmured acknowledgement, and one by one they offered formal recognition of Bjorn's status. As the gathering dispersed, Aldrich approached his daughter privately. "You were right," he said quietly, "about everything. I nearly destroyed your happiness protecting you from imaginary dangers while ignoring real ones. You gave me the education and strength to recognize what I wanted," Astrid replied gently, "and eventually you honored your word when it would have been easier to break it. That matters, father, does it?" He looked old suddenly, burdened by recognition of what he had almost lost. "I would give much to have those months back, to have handled everything differently from the start. The past cannot be changed," she said, "but we can choose what happens next. You're welcome in the Northern Reach, father, any time you wish to visit." Something in Aldrich's expression softened. "I may take you up on that. I find myself curious about this life you've chosen." 5 years passed like seasons changing, each distinct, each necessary, each building upon what came before. The Northern Reach grew from struggling settlement to thriving community, its reputation spreading throughout the region as a place where fair dealing and hard work mattered more than birth or wealth. Bjorn's role evolved from warrior claiming title to leader, genuinely earning the loyalty of his people. He settled disputes with wisdom learned from watching both success and failure, implemented systems for sharing resources during hardship, and maintained alliance with Jarl Eriksson through honest cooperation rather than fearful subservience. Astrid became more than simply the Thane's wife. She established a healing house where the injured and sick could receive treatment, taught literacy to children and adults alike, and served as counsel when complex decisions required perspective beyond military strategy. Together they created partnership that made their household stronger than either could have built alone. Their first child, a daughter, was born in the 3rd year during a spring storm that rattled the rafters, while Astrid brought new life into the world with a stubbornness that made the midwives laugh and cry simultaneously. They named her Sigrid after Bjorn's mother, and she grew up surrounded by people who saw her not as prize to be traded, but as person with her own right to choose her path. Lord Aldrich visited 4 times in those 5 years, staying longer each visit. On his final trip, as age and illness began claiming him, he sat with Bjorn beside the fire while Astrid tended children playing in the yard. "I was wrong about nearly everything," the old lord said reflectively. "I thought security came from alliances and wealth. I thought happiness was secondary to advantage. I thought my daughter needed protection from her own choices." "You loved her," Bjorn said simply. "Sometimes love makes us foolish in our attempts to keep safe what we treasure most." "Perhaps." Aldrich watched his daughter laughing with the children, her joy unguarded and genuine. "But you loved her better by trusting her strength rather than fearing her vulnerability. That is a lesson I learned too late for my own happiness, but not too late to appreciate in yours." He died peacefully that winter, in a guest room overlooking the northern forests he had come to admire. Astrid grieved honestly, not for the father who had tried to control her future, but for the man who had finally learned to let her write her own story. Grimwald passed the following spring, her succession already arranged to ensure stability. She had lived to see the settlement she founded become something greater than survival, a genuine community with identity and purpose. Her last words to Bjorn were characteristically blunt. "Don't screw this up. You've built something worth protecting." Jarl Eriksson, now significantly aged, began transitioning more authority to his thanes, trusting them to govern their regions with increasing autonomy. Bjorn found himself mediating disputes between other settlements, his reputation for fairness making him someone both parties could accept as arbiter. The impossible task he had undertaken years before, becoming a lord worthy of Astrid, had transformed into something neither of them had anticipated, building a legacy that would outlast them both, not through conquest or accumulated wealth, but through the simple act of treating people with dignity and creating space where they could flourish. On a summer evening in their 10th year together, Bjorn and Astrid sat outside their hall, watching the sunset paint the northern sky in shades of amber and rose. Their children, 3 now, played nearby under the watchful eyes of neighbors who treated them with casual affection rather than formal deference. "Do you ever regret it?" Bjorn asked quietly, "leaving your father's comfort for this harder life?" Astrid considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I regret nothing," she said finally. "Comfort without purpose is just a gilded cage. Here, every day matters. Every choice carries weight. Every person I help or child I teach or problem we solve together, it all means something real." She leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his with the ease of long familiarity. "You did the impossible, not by becoming what my father demanded, but by showing him there were better ways to measure a person's worth." That lesson changed both of us. In the village below, fires were being lit against the coming darkness. Smoke rose in lazy spirals toward the darkening sky. Voices carried on the evening breeze, laughter and conversation, the sounds of people living lives they had chosen and built through their own effort. "We're not heroes from the old songs," Bjorn observed. "We didn't slay dragons or topple kingdoms." "No," Astrid agreed. "We did something harder. We built a home where people can simply live well and honestly. That's not the kind of story that gets sung in great halls, but it's the kind that actually matters." The stars emerged one by one, ancient lights bearing witness to human struggles and triumphs, no matter how small or grand. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, not threat, but acknowledgement of shared territory, the understanding that different lives could coexist in the same wild space. Bjorn had set out to prove himself worthy of love. He had succeeded, but the journey had taught him that worth wasn't something claimed through title or deed alone. It was something built daily, through choices made and promises kept, through facing hardship without losing compassion, through understanding that true strength lay not in dominance, but in service. Their daughter Sigrid ran up to them, breathless from playing. "Papa, tell us the story, the one about how you crossed the frozen waste." "Not tonight," Astrid interjected gently. "Tonight, let's tell the story of how we built this place. That one's better. But Papa's story has wolves and ice and adventure, and our story has all of you," Astrid replied, gathering her children close. "Every person in this village, every home we built together, every winter we survived, and every spring we celebrated. That's the real adventure, the one that keeps continuing. If this journey moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and share in the comments what touched you the most. Your voice keeps these legends alive." As darkness settled completely, the family went inside their hall, leaving the door open behind them, always open, always welcoming, while the northern lights began their ancient dance across the sky. The fire within burned bright and warm, a beacon against the cold, promising shelter to any who needed it. In the end, Bjorn had not simply done the impossible to win Astrid's hand. He had learned that the impossible was just the beginning, that the real work was building something lasting from the ashes of what others deemed unachievable. He had transformed himself from warrior seeking title into leader who understood that true nobility came not from birth or decree, but from the daily choice to be worthy of the trust others placed in you. And in a world of Vikings, lords and power struggles, that quiet revolution meant more than any crown or conquest ever could. The story of Bjorn and Astrid became legend in the north, not as tale of perfect heroes, but as reminder that love combined with determination could indeed move mountains, or at least carve out space for something genuine in a world too often ruled by ambition and fear. Their legacy lived on not in monuments or written history, but in the community they built, the children they raised, and the example they set, that sometimes the greatest impossibility is simply choosing to live honestly and well, and building a life that honors both the person you love and the people who depend on you. The fire burned on through the night, as it always would, keeping the darkness at bay through nothing more than constant attention and steady fuel, a fitting metaphor for everything they had built together.